Imagine looking up at the night sky and seeing not stars, but cities. Gleaming structures floating among the clouds. Entire civilizations existing not on the ground beneath your feet, but in the heavens above your head. Impossible? Maybe. But across every continent, separated by oceans and millennia, ancient cultures told the same story. They spoke of sky cities, flying palaces, empires that ruled from above. The Sumerians called them the dwelling places of gods. The Hindus described floating cities in the Mahabharata. The Chinese spoke of celestial kingdoms. The Maya built pyramids as stairways to reach them. Coincidence? Cultural contamination? Or something else entirely? What if these weren't just myths? What if our ancestors witnessed something real? Something that defied everything we think we know about ancient history? What if the sky wasn't empty 5,000 years ago? Today, we're investigating one of history's most pervasive and haunting mysteries. Did ancient civilizations rule from the heavens? And if they did, where did they go? Welcome to Myths of the Cosmos. Let's ascend into the forgotten sky empires. Before we explore the myths, we need to establish a foundation. Because the question we're asking isn't just about mythology. It's about the very nature of technological advancement, the permanence of civilizations, and what traces would remain if an advanced society simply vanished. In archaeology, there's a concept called the stratigraphic record. It's the layers of Earth, each one representing a different period in history. When we dig down, we're essentially traveling back in time. And here's what's fascinating. The deeper we go, the more we find evidence that challenges our understanding of ancient capabilities. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built around 2560 BCE, remains an engineering marvel that modern contractors admit would be difficult to replicate even today. The precision is staggering. The base is level to within 2.1 centimeters. The sides are aligned to true north with an error of only 3.4 arc minutes. Over 2 million stone blocks, some weighing 80 tons, transported and placed with mathematics we're still deciphering. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, dating back to 9600 BCE, predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years and the pyramids by 7,000 years. Yet its astronomical alignments and massive T-shaped pillars suggest a level of organization and knowledge that shouldn't have existed among what we thought were simple hunter-gatherers. Puma Punku in Bolivia features andesite and diorite stones cut with such precision that they fit together without mortar, with edges that appear machine-tooled. The angles are perfect. The surfaces are smooth. Some stones weigh over 130 tons, and we still don't know how they achieved this or why the site appears to have been deliberately dismantled. Then there are the myths themselves. Not scattered random stories, but consistent, detailed accounts from cultures that supposedly never had contact. They describe flying machines, weapons of devastating power, aerial battles, and cities in the sky with such specificity that dismissing them as pure imagination becomes intellectually difficult. The Sanskrit epics, the Mahabharata and Ramayana, describe vimanas, flying palaces and chariots, in technical detail. They mention different types of craft, fuels, pilots, and even aerial combat tactics. The Tibetan texts speak of flying machines powered by mercury vortex engines. The Sumerian tablets describe the Anunnaki descending from the heavens in great flying ships. The Bible speaks of Ezekiel's wheel, a craft with rings within rings, covered in eyes, capable of moving in any direction. Are these just primitive attempts to explain natural phenomena, misunderstood astronomical events, symbolic representations of spiritual concepts? Or were our ancestors describing something they actually saw? Here's what makes this question so compelling. We now know that advanced civilizations can fall so completely that they vanish from history. The Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE erased entire empires. Literacy vanished from regions that had written for centuries. Technologies were lost. We call it a dark age because the light of knowledge literally went out. If that can happen in recorded history, what might have happened in the thousands of years before writing? What civilizations might have risen, reached heights we can barely imagine, and then fallen so completely that only myths remain? Let's explore what those myths actually say. And then let's examine whether physics, archaeology, and modern technology can shed light on these ancient impossibilities.
We begin our journey in ancient India because nowhere in the ancient world are the descriptions of sky technology more detailed, more technical, and more troubling to conventional history. The Vaimanika Shastra, an early 20th century text claimed to be based on ancient manuscripts, describes vimanas in extraordinary detail. It discusses metals that don't corrode, describes mercury vortex engines, explains different types of aircraft for different purposes, and even includes what appear to be technical diagrams. Skeptics immediately point out that the Vaimanika Shastra was channeled by a mystic in the 1900s and may not be authentically ancient. Fair point. But here's what they can't explain away. The much older Mahabharata and Ramayana, texts dating back at least 2,000 years and possibly much older, contain hundreds of references to flying machines with similar descriptions. The Mahabharata describes the Pushpaka Vimana, a flying palace that could transport entire armies. It flew at the speed of thought, could become invisible, and was large enough to house an entire city within its walls. The text says it was bright as the sun and loud as thunder, and when it took flight, the earth shook. In the Ramayana, Ravana's flying chariot is described in detail. The Pushpaka chariot that resembles the sun and belongs to my brother was brought by the powerful Ravana, that aerial and excellent chariot going everywhere at will, that chariot resembling a bright cloud in the sky, and the king got in, and the excellent chariot at the command of the Ragahra rose up into the higher atmosphere. These aren't vague poetic descriptions, they're specific. They mention speed, maneuverability, size, power sources, and even flight characteristics. The Samarangana Sutradhara, a scientific treatise from the 11th century, states, "Strong and durable must the body of the Vimana be made, like a great flying bird of light material. Inside one must put the mercury engine with its heating apparatus underneath. By the means of the power latent in the mercury, which sets the driving whirlwind in motion, a man sitting inside may travel a great distance in the sky." mercury vortex propulsion. It sounds like science fiction, but here's what's fascinating. Modern experimental physics has actually explored mercury-based propulsion systems. Mercury, when subjected to powerful magnetic fields and rapid rotation, creates strange plasma effects that some researchers believe could generate anti-gravitational forces. NASA and private aerospace companies have conducted experiments with rotating mercury plasmas. The results are classified, but the research exists. Could ancient Indians have understood these principles? Conventional archaeology says no, but then how do we explain the descriptions? The Sabhaparva section of the Mahabharata describes an aerial battle between Vimanas that sounds disturbingly like modern warfare. Bhima flew along in his car, resplendent as the sun and loud as thunder. The flying chariot shone like a flame in the night sky of summer. It swept by like a comet. It was as if two suns were shining. Then the chariot rose up and all the heavens brightened. More troubling still are descriptions of weapons. The Mahabharata describes the Brahmastra, a weapon of terrible power. A single projectile charged with all the power of the universe, an incandescent column of smoke and flame as bright as 10,000 suns rose in all its splendor. It was an unknown weapon, an iron thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death that reduced to ashes the entire race of the Vrishnis and the Andakas. The corpses were so burned as to be unrecognizable. Their hair and nails fell out, pottery broke without apparent cause, and the birds turned white. After a few hours, all foodstuffs were infected. To escape from this fire, the soldiers threw themselves in streams to wash themselves and their equipment. Read that description again. Hair falling out, pottery breaking from radiation, white birds, soldiers washing themselves and equipment to decontaminate. This is a description of radiation poisoning written thousands of years before we split the atom. In the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, one of the great cities of the Indus Valley civilization, archaeologists have found skeletons with radiation levels 50 times higher than normal. The city shows evidence of an extreme heat event that vitrified portions of the architecture, something that requires temperatures at least 1500 degrees Celsius. Some stones show evidence of having been exposed to a heat flash so intense it fused the surface layers. Mainstream archaeology attributes this to natural causes or primitive furnaces, but they've never quite explained how a primitive furnace achieves nuclear-level temperatures in an open city street. The ancient texts also describe something else, the fall of these flying empires. The Mahabharata speaks of a great war that destroyed the sky cities and caused the Vimanas to crash to Earth. It describes ecological catastrophe, the darkening of the skies, and the loss of this ancient knowledge as punishment for hubris. What if these texts aren't mythology, but history? What if ancient India witnessed advanced technology, possibly their own, possibly from visitors, and the memory was preserved in epic poetry because writing systems failed or weren't yet developed? The evidence doesn't prove it, but it suggests something happened that ancient people struggled to explain with the vocabulary they had. And sometimes, when we look at what they described, it looks disturbingly like technology we're only now beginning to understand.
India isn't alone. The motif of sky cities appears across the ancient world with remarkable consistency. In Sumerian mythology, the Anunnaki gods lived in Nibiru, sometimes described as a wandering planet, sometimes as a great flying city ship. The Sumerian king list speaks of rulers who reigned for impossibly long periods, tens of thousands of years before the Great Flood. These kings descended from the heavens and ruled from floating palaces. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes the cedar forest and the dwelling of the gods reached by a magical flight. Gilgamesh witnesses the gods' city in the sky, with golden walls and jeweled gates, a place where mortals cannot normally go. In Greek mythology, Olympus wasn't originally described as a mountain. Early texts describe it as being in the air, a place above the clouds where gods lived in palaces made of materials unknown on Earth. Only later did Olympus become associated with the physical mountain. The Chinese have extensive records of sky cities. The Huainanzi, compiled in the 2nd century BCE, describes flying machines and aerial palaces. The legend of the Yellow Emperor tells of his ascension to heaven in a dragon chariot, a flying machine that carried him and 70 of his followers into the sky, never to return. Chinese historical records from the Tang Dynasty describe strange aerial phenomena. In the year 911, a large flying object appeared in the western sky, glowing bright as lightning. It moved northeast and was visible for hours before departing. The Japanese have legends of Tokoyo no Kuni, the eternal land in the sky, where immortals lived in floating palaces. These weren't just spiritual heavens. The text described physical journeys, flying boats, and return visits to Earth. In South America, the Inca spoke of Paititi, the lost city of gold hidden in the clouds. But older legends suggest Paititi wasn't hidden in the mountains. It floated in the sky. The Temple of the Sun in Cuzco had golden discs that supposedly allowed communication with the gods in their sky realm. In the Maya, they developed complex astronomical calendars and built pyramids precisely aligned to celestial events. But they also told stories of the first humans who could see everything. They could see the cities in the sky. They could witness the councils of the gods. The gods found this alarming and clouded humanity's vision, so we could no longer see the hidden realm. In the Bible, there are multiple references to sky cities. Revelation describes New Jerusalem descending from heaven, a city of gold with dimensions measured in thousands of stadia, enormous, hovering above the earth. Ezekiel's vision describes what sounds like a technological craft, not a spiritual metaphor. Wheels within wheels, bright metal, capable of vertical takeoff and moving in any direction without turning. The Book of Enoch, removed from most biblical canons, describes Enoch being taken to heaven in a flying house of crystal, where he witnesses the dwelling places of angels, technological descriptions masked in religious language. He describes moving floors, glowing walls, and chambers that control weather and seasons. In Norse mythology, Asgard is the city of the gods, connected to Earth by the Bifrost, often translated as a rainbow bridge, but some scholars suggest the original description is closer to a beam of light. The gods traveled up and down this light beam between their sky city and the mortal world. Here's what's striking. These aren't vague spiritual heavens. They're described with architectural detail. Materials are mentioned, sizes are given, methods of access are explained, and they're all described as physical places that existed in the sky, not in some alternate spiritual dimension. Anthropologists explain this as a universal human tendency to place sacred spaces above the sky as a metaphor for divine distance from earthly concerns. And that's probably true for many versions of these myths. But some descriptions are too specific, too technical, too consistent across cultures that had no contact. When the ancient Mahabharata describes a flying city,
and the Chinese chronicles describe a flying city, and the Sumerians describe a flying city, and all three give similar details about how they moved, what they looked like, and how they eventually fell. At what point does universal metaphor become inadequate as an explanation? In 1976, NASA scientist Joseph Blumrich, initially setting out to debunk Ezekiel's vision, ended up writing a book called The Spaceships of Ezekiel, in which he demonstrated that the biblical description could be mapped onto a technically feasible spacecraft design. He obtained a patent for an omnidirectional wheel based on Ezekiel's description, a wheel that works. When ancient texts describe hovering cities with specific dimensions, specific materials, and specific physical properties, we have three choices. Dismiss it all as coincidental fantasy, consider it misunderstood natural phenomena, or entertain the possibility that something real inspired these remarkably consistent accounts. The question isn't whether we believe ancient people flew around in cities. The question is, what did they see that made them describe these things with such peculiar consistency?
Let's step away from mythology and into physics. Could a civilization actually build and maintain cities in the sky? What would it require? And more importantly, is it physically possible? First, let's address buoyancy. Hot air balloons work because heated air is less dense than cool air. Helium and hydrogen balloons work because these gases are lighter than atmospheric nitrogen and oxygen. A sky city using these principles would need to be either impossibly large or ridiculously light. A structure the size of a small city, let's say 1 square mile, would need to displace an enormous volume of air to remain aloft. Even using hydrogen, the lifting gas would need to be contained in massive cells, making the structure vulnerable to any puncture. The Hindenburg disaster shows how dangerous hydrogen-based lift can be. So, buoyancy isn't practical for anything beyond small observational platforms. True sky cities would need something else. Enter anti-gravity. For most of history, anti-gravity was pure science fiction. But modern physics has revealed that gravity isn't quite what Newton thought. Einstein showed that gravity is actually the curvature of space-time. And if space-time can be curved one way, theoretically it could be curved another way. In the 1990s, Russian physicist Eugene Podkletnov claimed to have measured a small weight reduction in objects above a rotating superconducting disk. His results were controversial and have never been definitively replicated, but they sparked serious research into gravitational anomalies around superconductors and rotating systems. NASA's Breakthrough Propulsion Physics project, active from 1996 to 2002, seriously investigated propellantless propulsion, including potential gravitational manipulation. The project concluded that while no current technology could achieve anti-gravity, the laws of physics don't absolutely forbid it. Quantum physics reveals even stranger possibilities. The Casimir effect demonstrates that vacuum energy, the energy of supposedly empty space, is real and can produce measurable forces. Some physicists speculate that sufficiently advanced technology might manipulate vacuum energy to create propulsion or alter gravitational effects. But here's where it gets interesting for our question about ancient sky cities.
You don't necessarily need anti-gravity. You might need what's called a magneto-hydrodynamic drive. Magnetohydrodynamics, MHD, is the study of magnetic properties of electrically conducting fluids. Mercury is such a fluid, and some experimental research has shown that rotating mercury subjected to powerful magnetic fields creates unusual plasma effects with potential anti-gravitational properties. Remember those ancient Indian texts describing mercury vortex engines? Modern physics has actually explored this concept. The specific mechanisms remain unclear, and any actual anti-gravitational effect would be tiny with current technology. But the fact that serious aerospace engineers have investigated mercury-based propulsion makes those ancient descriptions less easy to dismiss. There's also the possibility of electromagnetic suspension. Magnetic levitation, maglev trains, demonstrate that objects can be stably suspended using electromagnetic forces. Superconducting magnets can levitate objects indefinitely with minimal power input. A sufficiently advanced civilization could potentially use global or localized magnetic field manipulation to suspend structures. Earth has a magnetosphere, a magnetic field that extends into space. What if ancient technology learned to interact with this field? Some researchers have noted that many ancient megalithic sites show unusual magnetic properties. Temples and pyramids often have magnetic anomalies. Could these have been more than monuments? Could they have been components of a larger system? Then there's acoustic levitation. Sound waves at certain frequencies and intensities can suspend objects in mid-air. We can do this in laboratories now with small objects. The ancient texts often describe sounds associated with flying objects. Deep humming, loud thundering roars, musical tones. Could these have been functional descriptions of acoustic propulsion? In 2014, researchers at the University of Tokyo demonstrated acoustic tractor beams that could move and manipulate objects using only sound waves. In 2016, scientists created an acoustic levitation device that could hold multiple objects simultaneously. If we can do this with modern technology at small scales, could an advanced ancient civilization have done it at large scales? But let's address the elephant in the room: power. Any floating city would require enormous amounts of energy. Where would an ancient civilization get that power? Well, the ancients were obsessed with the sun. Every major civilization built solar temples. Many ancient sites show sophisticated understanding of solar geometry and annual solar cycles. What if this wasn't just religious symbolism? What if they were harvesting solar power? We think of solar power as modern technology, but the principle is simple: convert sunlight to energy. The efficiency of that conversion determines practicality. If ancient metallurgy achieved what some anomalous artifacts suggest, precision cutting, advanced alloys, electroplating, then perhaps their understanding of physics was more sophisticated than we credit. There's also geothermal energy, which requires no modern technology to access, just good engineering. Many ancient sites were built near volcanic activity. The oracle at Delphi sat above a geological fault that released vapors. Could sites have been chosen not just for spiritual reasons, but for energy access? Nuclear energy is another possibility people rarely consider. natural nuclear reactors have existed on Earth. The Oklo reactors in Gabon operated 2 billion years ago when uranium concentrations were higher. Could ancient civilizations have discovered and utilized radioactive materials? The high radiation levels at some ancient sites make you wonder. Here's the unsettling truth. Physics doesn't forbid sky cities. Engineering doesn't forbid them. They would be extremely difficult, requiring sophisticated understanding of materials, energy, and physics, but they're not impossible. If an advanced civilization existed with technology different from ours, not electronic, but based on acoustic, magnetic, and material properties we're only now rediscovering, they could theoretically build structures that floated or appeared to float. The question isn't, could it be done? The question is, was it done? And if so, what happened to it all?
If sky empires existed, they left few traces. This is actually the strongest argument against their existence. Surely something so massive would leave undeniable evidence. Or would it? Let's consider what happens when civilizations fall. The Bronze Age collapse around 1177 BCE destroyed empires across the Mediterranean. The Mycenaeans, Hittites, Minoans, entire civilizations vanished in a cascading failure that took only decades. Cities were abandoned, writing systems were forgotten, technologies were lost. For 400 years, the Eastern Mediterranean existed in a dark age where people literally forgot how to read and write. If that can happen to civilizations we know existed, with cities and monuments and written records, what could happen to something more ephemeral, something that floated in the sky and potentially required continuous power and maintenance to remain aloft? If sky cities required constant energy input and sophisticated technology to stay airborne, then any systemic failure, war, natural disaster, resource depletion, would be catastrophic. The cities would fall, literally. And what would remain? Crash sites, scattered debris, materials that seemed impossibly advanced mixed with ruins, strange artifacts that don't fit the technological timeline. We have those. We call them out-of-place artifacts, or uarps. The Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek analog computer so sophisticated that nothing comparable existed for over 1,000 years. The Baghdad battery, a 2,000-year-old device that appears to be a galvanic cell. Precision-cut stone blocks around the world that seem machined rather than chiseled. Metal objects found in coal seams and rock formations millions of years old. Mainstream archaeology explains each one individually. Misidentified, misunderstood, contaminated samples, modern intrusions into ancient strata. And many of these explanations are probably correct, but the sheer number of anomalies scattered across continents and millennia suggests a pattern. What if some of these artifacts aren't anomalies, but remnants, pieces of technology that survived when the sky cities fell? Here's a thought experiment. If modern civilization collapsed tomorrow, what would remain in 5,000 years? Our cities would erode. Most buildings would be gone. Concrete crumbles. Steel rusts. Even our computer chips, our most advanced technology, would corrode into unrecognizable fragments. What would survive?
Stone, some metals, ceramics. Gold doesn't tarnish. Platinum is nearly indestructible. But electronics? Gone. Plastics? Degraded. The International Space Station? It would deorbit and burn up. Our satellites? Dead metal falling from the sky. A future archaeologist 5,000 years from now, digging through the ruins of our civilization, might find stone structures, some gold jewelry, fragments of ceramics, and a few strange metallic objects they can't quite explain. They would have to reconstruct our entire technological society from these remnants. That's what we're doing with ancient civilizations. We're reconstructing their world from the most durable materials: stone, pottery, some metals. Everything else, textiles, wood, paper, possibly advanced materials we don't recognize, is gone. If sky cities existed and fell, what would we find? Perhaps precisely what we do find. Myths describing advanced technology, massive stone monuments aligned with astronomical precision, scattered artifacts that seem impossibly sophisticated, and radioactive ruins that shouldn't exist. The ancient texts describe a cataclysm. The Mahabharata speaks of a great war that destroyed the flying cities. The Bible describes the Tower of Babel, humanity's attempt to reach heaven that ended in catastrophic failure. Plato speaks of Atlantis, an advanced civilization destroyed in a day and night. The Hopi speak of previous worlds that ended in destruction when humanity became too proud. What if these aren't separate myths, but fragments of the same memory? What if something catastrophic happened that brought the sky cities down? There's geological evidence of major climate events around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. The Younger Dryas event saw rapid temperature changes. Massive flooding occurred. Sea levels rose dramatically. Some researchers point to possible asteroid or comet impacts. Whatever happened, it was significant enough to end the last ice age and reshape continents. If advanced civilizations existed during this period, operating flying cities or platforms, such a cataclysm would be devastating. Power systems might fail. Navigation might become impossible. The cities would crash. Coastal civilizations would be inundated by rising seas. Knowledge would be lost as populations struggled for survival. The survivors would remember. They would tell stories to their children about the time when cities floated in the sky, when their ancestors possessed power over the elements, when humanity could touch the heavens. Over generations, these stories would become myths. The technical details would blur into magic. The science would become religion. But the memory would persist. And that might be exactly what we are seeing in these remarkably consistent myths across cultures. Not pure imagination, not coincidental fantasy, but the last echo of something real, filtered through thousands of years of retelling. Whether or not ancient sky empires existed, humanity is now on the verge of building them ourselves. And in doing so, we're discovering that our ancestors might have known more than we thought. In the 1960s, NASA seriously studied the concept of floating cities, not for Earth, but for Venus. The Venus atmosphere, at about 50 kilometers altitude, has temperatures and pressures similar to Earth's surface.
A floating city filled with breathable air would be buoyant in Venus's thick atmosphere. NASA's high-altitude Venus operational concept proposes exactly this: cities floating in the clouds of Venus. On Earth, architects and engineers have proposed floating cities for decades. Buckminster Fuller designed Cloud 9, 10-segrity sphere structures large enough that the heated air inside would make them buoyant. Aerospace engineer Jacques Fresco proposed cities on floating platforms in the ocean. Today, tech companies like Blue Seed propose floating tech havens in international waters. We're also developing the technology to make true anti-gravity possible. Lockheed Martin has patents for plasma-based propulsion systems. Boeing has researched gravity modification experiments. The U.S. military has acknowledged programs investigating advanced aerospace threat identification that involve craft with apparent anti-gravitational capabilities. In 2017, the Pentagon confirmed the existence of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, which studied unidentified aerial phenomena. The released footage shows craft moving in ways that seem to violate known physics. No visible propulsion, extreme acceleration, transmedium travel. Whether these are foreign technology, natural phenomena, or something else, they demonstrate that objects can apparently remain airborne and maneuver in ways our public physics doesn't explain. Meanwhile, archaeologists continue finding sites that challenge conventional timelines. Göbekli Tepe rewrote what we knew about pre-agricultural civilizations. The recent discovery of massive structures beneath the Amazon rainforest using LiDAR reveals civilizations far more sophisticated than previously thought. Underwater archaeology is finding submerged cities and structures off the coasts of India, Japan, and the Mediterranean, cities that would have been above water 10,000 years ago. In 2001, researchers found massive structures off the coast of Cuba at depths of 2,100 feet. Sonar images showed what appeared to be pyramids, roads, and buildings arranged in geometric patterns. Mainstream archaeology has largely ignored these findings because there's no accepted mechanism for cities to exist underwater at that depth from known ancient civilizations. But if sea levels rose dramatically at the end of the last ice age, Graham Hancock and other alternative historians have compiled extensive evidence suggesting sophisticated civilizations existed before the accepted start of civilization. While mainstream academia rejects their conclusions, the evidence they present is difficult to dismiss entirely. Precision stone cutting at Puma Punku, astronomical alignments at sites worldwide, the Göbekli Tepe mystery, the Sphinx erosion controversy. Here's what's becoming clear. Ancient humans were far more capable than we've credited them. Whether they had help from an even more advanced civilization, whether they were the advanced civilization, or whether they were simply brilliant with the tools they had, they achieved remarkable things. And some of their myths describe sky cities with enough consistency and detail that we should at least investigate whether these stories have any basis in lost technology or forgotten history. The truth might be simpler than ancient aliens or lost super civilizations. Perhaps ancient people developed hot air balloon technology or lighter-than-air craft we haven't recognized in the archaeological record. Perhaps they built platforms on mountains that were so impressive they seemed like sky cities. Perhaps they witnessed rare atmospheric phenomena, mirages, superior mirages, fata morgana, that created visions of cities in the sky. Or perhaps, just perhaps, someone figured out something about physics and materials that we're only now rediscovering. And for a time, a brief time in the long history of humanity, cities did float in the heavens.
Did ancient civilizations rule from the heavens? We can't say with certainty. The evidence is fragmentary, the myths are ambiguous, and the archaeological record has gaps we may never fill. But what we can say is this: across every continent, across thousands of years, human beings looked at the sky and described the same thing. Cities floating among the clouds, empires ruling from above, technology that defied earthbound limitations. These accounts are too consistent, too detailed, and too widespread to dismiss as random fantasy. Whether these myths describe actual floating cities, advanced platforms, misunderstood phenomena, or something else entirely, they tell us something important. Our ancestors dreamed of reaching the heavens, and their dreams were specific, technical, and remarkably consistent. Today, as we develop our own floating platforms, our own anti-gravity research, our own sky cities for other worlds, we're walking a path our ancestors may have walked before. We're rediscovering that the boundary between ground and sky is not as absolute as it seems. We're learning that, with the right knowledge, the right materials, and the right understanding of physics, anything is possible. The cosmos is full of mysteries, and the sky above our heads might be the greatest mystery of all. Because in those clouds, in that vast blue expanse, might lie the echoes of forgotten empires, cities that rose so high they touched the stars, civilizations that ruled not from stone palaces, but from golden platforms floating among the gods. The evidence is there for those willing to look. The myths are there for those willing to listen. And the questions remain for those brave enough to ask. This is Myths of the Cosmos. If you want to explore more mysteries where ancient wisdom meets cutting-edge science, where myths might be memories and imagination might be forgotten truth, subscribe to our channel. Because the sky has secrets, and we're just beginning to uncover them. Until next time, keep looking up. And remember, sometimes when you see clouds, you might be seeing more than just water vapor. You might be seeing the ghosts of empires that once ruled the heavens.